Kids can be dismissed. Almost forgot about you. I was at a friend's house it's probably been more than a year now. Seems like yesterday, but it was being examined by a pest control agent. I happened to be there when the pest control guy stopped by, and they found some water damage, but they didn't find any termites. And the agent said, be really happy about that. Termites can eat away at the frame of your house, and you don't see them until it's too late. He said they eat the paint, then the shell, until the house begins to crumble from within. And we were in the middle of a conversation when he started telling us this, and then he gave us a lot more of an unsolicited lesson about the nature of insects, but kind of glad he did because I remembered for this sermon. He said, hey, the queen termite lives deep in the ground, and they breed as many as 1 million termites a year. He said, we can't go in and kill all the termites on someone's property. He said it'd be impossible. Instead, what they do to a house is they treat the house by put in a chemical wall of protection around the house. He says they drill down every 1.5 feet, down deep, and they interject these pesticides. The termites, the ants, the roaches, and other pests that breed underground are discouraged from going near those pesticides, so they go to your neighbor's house or somewhere else, right? He said, we can't kill them, but we can control them. So what I want to do today is begin a series of messages on pest control. These are some unseen scourges that can enter the Christian life and eat away at our character. We might have the same looking facade from day to day, but imperceptibly, these pests are eating away at the core of our being, and they're dangerous pests, and if not exterminated, they can consume our joy, our contentment, and our Christian testimony. So what I want to do over these next couple of weeks is identify the culprits or the pest and help you build a wall of protection around yourself to prevent them from destroying you, right? We don't want these little pests to do business in our lives. Today we'll start with criticism. Jesus said in Matthew chapter 7, verse 1, do not judge or you too will be judged. The question is, what exactly was he forbidding? He wasn't forbidding spiritual discernment. You know, nearly every single time a Christian takes a stand on an important moral issue, someone will protest. And they'll say, who are you to judge? Who are you to judge whether the religions of other cultures are right or wrong? Who are you to judge? And they can list any number of issues. They'll say, didn't Jesus say just love everyone? Didn't Jesus say don't judge or you'll be judged? Well, listen, Jesus wasn't saying to never be critical of another's sinful behavior. Jesus himself called Herod a dangerous fox. He called the Pharisees a brood of vipers. He challenged the money changers in the temple for being greedy. He taught his followers to be discerning and to make wise judgments about people. In 1 Corinthians chapter 5, the church was chastised for not making moral judgments. In Matthew chapter 7, verse 16, Jesus said, by their fruit, you'll recognize them. So while we're not sitting on God's eternal throne, we are to be fruit inspectors here on earth. The Bible says things like, don't be yoked together with unbelievers, or to be aware of false prophets who come in sheep's clothing, or to rebuke the brother or sister who sins, and by the way, forgive the one who repents. How can you do those things, any of them, if you don't make some sort of moral judgments? Some people have to make moral discernments in their jobs. Policemen who make arrests, judges who oversee cases, employers who interview to hire people. Even in the church, when we nominate people for offices, we have to be spiritually discerning. So in this passage, Jesus said, don't cast your pearls to the pigs. How do you tell the difference between a pig and a sheep if you don't make some kind of moral judgment? So Jesus didn't condemn constructive criticism. Constructive criticism is essential in our world because there are potholes in the roads, there are weeds in the gardens, there are loopholes in the laws, there are faults in people, there are flaws in programs, and God has given us this critical faculty to spot that which is wrong and correct it. Employers, to run the best possible business, have to be critical of their employees to help them run the business properly. Parents, if they're going to raise their children to be responsible adults, are going to have to criticize and correct the children. I'm glad, for example, that someone has been critical of automobile safety, right? We've got headrests and seat belts and airbags that make it a lot safer to travel in cars. And those are the things we don't need. Fancy things like, I don't know, these heaters that John was talking about and a starter, I don't know. But we need, those airbags, they protect us, and it's because someone was being critical and looking for ways to improve. Sometimes I get irritated with the press because they're very, sometimes overly negative. But because the press has the freedom to criticize government, it keeps politicians on their toes. Criticism is a necessary part of a healthy society. And when people lose the freedom to criticize, the culture can begin to decline. It will decline very quickly. So Jesus did not say, now be sure to take that plank out of your eye and then leave your brother alone to suffer with his speck. No. He said, take the plank out of your own eye so then you can clearly see to help get that speck out of your brother's eye. I think what Jesus was prohibiting here was the sin of hypercriticism, the vexing habit of searching for little things wrong in other people and taking delight in condemning them for it. This insidious termite finds something negative to chew on and eats away at that 2% of negativity, completely ignoring the 98% of positivity. I think Jesus is talking about the husband who ignores the fact that his wife is kind and a good mother and a faithful employee and has a pleasant personality and just criticizes her nonstop for her housekeeping skills. Or I think he was talking about the church member who comes to church and just picks away at every little thing that happened during an hour service and goes home having received very little from the service, but probably was a source of irritation to someone else there. He's talking about the employee who behind the scenes is working at nibbling away at the faults of the leader or the flaws of their co-workers. There's this constant menacing, irritating, critical spirit. John Wesley was a powerful reformer. He was also a modern dresser at times. And one time he was preaching and he had on a very contemporary bow tie that had long streamers. There was a dear saint in the audience who was offended by that, and she missed the entire message because she was focused on John Wesley's tie. After the service, she went up to him and said, Brother Wesley, would you permit a word of criticism? She said, your bow tie is entirely too long and is an evidence of worldliness to me. Wesley looked out at the crowd and said, anyone have a pair of scissors? Someone gave him a pair of scissors, and he handed them to this dear saint and said, why don't you just cut them off where it suits you? And she did. She cut off a couple inches of his streamers on both sides. And she said, that's much better. He said, thank you. Now, ma'am, would you please hand me the pair of scissors? He said, would you stick out your tongue? He said, it is entirely too long and an evidence of worldliness to me. Wanted to cut it down to size. I guess we're all guilty of this at times, having tongues that are too long when it comes to criticism. Why do we do that? Why do we have the Siskel and Ebert mentality of life where we think we have to give a thumbs up or a thumbs down to every single thing that we see? One reason is guilt. Criticism at times can salve our own guilty consciences. You might remember when the little boy David went to his brothers at the army camp, and David was appalled that the Philistine giant Goliath was taunting the Israelite army of God. And David said, why do we allow this uncircumcised Philistine to mock the army of the living God? Why doesn't someone fight him? Eliab, David's older brother, became very critical of David. Why'd you come down here, he said. Who's taking care of that little handful of sheep that you normally take care of? He says, I know how conceited you are and how wicked your heart is. You just came down here to watch the battle. Criticism comes a little harder on us when it comes from someone close to you. In this case, it was David's brother. It hurts most when someone's attacking your motives. But here's the deal. Eliud was an impressive person in stature. Eliud might have been one of the natural ones that should have gone out and fought Goliath, but he wanted no part of that battle. So now he's criticizing David for his motives, suggesting that someone should go fight him. See, we don't want to admit our own failures. We don't want to admit that we've got this log sticking out of our eye, so we make ourselves feel better by exaggerating the faults of somebody else. John Stott, one of my favorite authors, wrote, what we are often doing is seeing our own faults in others and judging them vicariously, that we experience the pleasure of self-righteousness without the pain of penitence. In other words, we're just projecting our faults onto somebody else. Another reason we criticize people is out of envy. Jesus was absolutely perfect, but he was the victim of constant criticism. He didn't observe the Sabbath correctly. He didn't wash his hands before he ate. He was too liberal about the Gentiles. He was too conservative about divorce. But the real problem was that the religious leaders were envious of Jesus' popularity. They wanted to discredit him. If you get jealous of somebody, you're inclined to look for their faults. And you rejoice in their faults when you find them. That's why the more successful you are in your field, the more vulnerable you are to criticism from others. Envious people seek to exalt themselves by tearing somebody else down. They have the strange idea that somehow they're going to look bigger if they can make you look smaller. Another reason for criticizing people is ego. We live in a time where it's kind of the in thing to be critical. We pay people to be movie critics, political critics. If a news reporter writes a positive story, he appears to be a cheerleader by his peers. Someone who writes a negative story is considered to be an in-depth professional. He might be considered for a journalistic award. If you turn the spotlight onto the negative in conversation, in many circles you're considered to be courageous, perceptive. So one way to get the attention of people is to be critical. Eventually it backfires, though, and you get judged by the way you have judged others. You can turn people off if you're negative all the time. The Bible says pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. All right? So why is it wrong to criticize? Why was Jesus so stern here in his prohibition about criticizing? Well, I think one of the reasons he condemned it is because it is so horrible to the person being criticized. Even if you talk behind somebody's back, it eventually, almost invariably, gets back to that person. People get hurt by reputation, by criticism. Reputations are ruined. Jobs are lost. Because no matter how tough-skinned people are, criticism hurts. They might not always let you see it, but criticism always hurts. Even if it doesn't get back to them, it can hurt them. You might reduce the effectiveness of that person in the future in the eyes of others. Romans 14:13 says, "Therefore let us stop passing judgment on one another. Instead, make up your minds not to put up a stumbling block or an obstacle in your brother's way." From time to time, I'll talk to other preachers. I have a network of people we email back and forth and chat online. And one of the things that comes up quite often is this topic of criticism. Someone will say, "How do you live with it?" You know, for a lot of these preachers, thankfully I don't suffer this like so many others, but 98% of everything happening in their church is positive. But the 2% of the negative that occurs just grinds them down and disheartens them to the point they are moving from church to church to church every 2 or 3 years. Criticism is a heavy weight. Galatians 5:14 says, "The entire law is summed up in a single command: love your neighbor as yourself." But if you keep on biting and devouring each other, watch out or you'll be destroyed by each other. Nothing has split up more churches or broken up more families or discouraged more leaders, alienated more friendships than a spirit of backbiting and fault-finding. People who have been Christians for years sometimes see nothing wrong with condemning some minor fault they find in another and never understand that their criticizing of somebody is doing a lot more damage than the thing they're criticizing about. maybe the worst result of criticism is the damage it does to the critic himself. Jesus said, in the same way you judge others, you will be judged. When you stand before God on Judgment Day, do you want him to be merciful to you? Then be merciful to others. This verse has a present-day application, too. Criticism can devour your personality, make your life miserable right now. No matter how lovely your home, no matter how wonderful your family, no matter how compassionate your friends, no matter how great your country, no matter how fulfilling your job, no matter how terrific your church, you just begin to focus on what's wrong, and you miss all of the good of the rest of that. You just judge and criticize, and eventually your peace and your contentment are eaten away, and your life becomes miserable, and everyone else is turned off to you altogether. Heard about a woman who went into a hardware store, and she just criticized everything she saw, every item on the shelf. She finally came to some brooms, and she said, these brooms are never going to hold up. Their structure's so unstable. The straw is not dependable. The handle's rough. I don't know what possible purpose these brooms could serve. And the clerk, hearing quite enough, finally said, well, why don't you take and ride one of them home and find out? You may get attention by being critical, but people will lose respect for you in the long run, and you hurt yourself. So how do we control it? What's the solution? That's the most important question we'll answer today, right? I think the first thing we need to do is recognize the wickedness of it. Let's quit rationalizing and excusing ourselves by saying, well, I'm a perfectionist, or I like everything done right. The funniest one is, God's given me the gift of criticism. That's not in the Bible. You know, it's one thing to demand perfection of yourself, but to demand it of someone else, it's just not the way you're wired. It's a sinful habit by which you're making yourself and others around you miserable. David prayed a prayer in Psalm chapter 139, verse 23, and he said, search me, O God, and know my heart today. Try me and see if there be any wicked way in me. Maybe you need to do a self-termite inspection of your heart. Secondly, having recognized the wickedness of it, let's repent. To repent means to go the opposite direction. So instead of saying, well, I'm just going to bite my lip and not say anything, what you really ought to do is find something positive to say. All right? It'd be great to just not say anything, but the next possible step, the best thing to do is to find something positive to say. Did you know that the word encourage is really two words? It's instill courage. And when you are positive, and when you are encouraging people, you are instilling boldness. You're instilling courage into their lives. David Novak is the director of Kentucky Fried Chicken. That company was going through a tough time, and they made him their director just a couple of years ago, and he's turned that industry upside down, that business upside down. In a business that was flat, they grew their profits by 10% in 1 year's time. One of the reasons that David is such a good leader is he's a great encourager. Every month he gives out 2 or 3 floppy chicken awards to people who are doing a great job. He flies across the country to meet with a franchisee, give him a floppy chicken award, and he takes a picture of it, and then he takes it back, puts it on his office, and he's got his office wall lined with dozens and dozens of these pictures of people he has encouraged. And he's built his business up with the primary value of encouragement instead of criticism. The greatest psychology in the world might be found in Philippians chapter 4 and verse 8, where Paul said, finally, brothers, whatever is true, whatever is noble, whatever is right, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is admirable, if anything is excellent or praiseworthy, think about these things. Then thirdly, before you criticize someone, put yourself in their place. Ezekiel the prophet was about to go out and just lambaste the people. He wanted to go out and criticize them, but then he stopped and he said, I sat where they sat. Sympathize with them. You know, we have such partial knowledge of people. We're not really capable of making perfect judgments. We don't know what paralyzes somebody else. We don't know about their chemical imbalances. We don't know about their home life. We don't know about their temperament. We don't know anything about what tempts them. Only God knows all of those things. In the meantime, we need to try and be patient and try to understand. My point is this: instead of popping off all the time with critical comments, wait until you get the facts. Put yourself in the other person's position. Sit where they sit. Years ago, I was fortunate enough to go to, early 1980s, I was still in college. We did a trip to California, and I went to go see The Tonight Show when Johnny Carson was still doing the hosting of that show. And before the show began, before they started the taping, they had people on the stage getting everyone kind of worked up in the audience. And they said, hey, we're going to take some still shots of you laughing. So they would have someone come out and tell a joke, and then they would take pictures of the audience laughing. And then they said, we need to take a shot of the crowd applauding. So they did a little stunt, and we all sat out there and applauded, and they'd take a picture. Then they said, now we want a shot of the crowd laughing and bursting into applause. And I remember saying to Alan, my friend that I was with, watch this, they're going to tell a dirty joke, and we're going to be sitting here applauding, and they're going to show it on TV. And sure enough, the comedian comes out, and he told a funny joke, but then during the live taping, he told an even worse joke, but they showed that picture of us sitting there in the audience laughing, but you'd never know that at home. So, in case you see that reel pop up someday, because now they're showing Johnny Carson out there, please get all the facts. Before you criticize someone, sit where they sit. Fourthly, before you criticize, pray for them. Jesus knew that Simon Peter had a pretty up and down character, right? He's kind of fickle. And he knew that Peter was going to deny him. And Jesus went to Peter and he said, hey, Simon, Satan has asked to sift you like wheat, but I've prayed for you. I've prayed for you, Simon, so that you don't fail. When you've turned back, strengthen your brothers, he told Peter. That's one of the reasons I think why Jesus was so tolerant and forgiving of Simon Peter. He was very quick to reinstate him. He had prayed for him. It's difficult to pray for someone else's success and then be hypercritical or stern with him. If we sincerely pray for the well-being of another, I think we'll start looking for the best instead of the worst. Number 5, don't criticize the person behind their back. If you're going to criticize, do it personally in love. Matthew 18:15 says, if your brother sins against you, go and show him his fault just between the two of you. If you go and talk about someone else to someone else, that's not helping that person at all. It's not solving the problem. It's deepening the problem. Don't tell someone else. You've got to go talk to that person. Years ago, in the Christian Church of Wyandotte, we had a lady who was an English teacher, and after a sermon one time, she came out and she says, Randy, I love when you preach. I love to hear your sermons. I've learned a lot. But there's one thing you always say, and it's grammatically incorrect. It drives me crazy. And I don't want to make a big deal of it, but maybe the incorrect use of English could turn someone else off from hearing what you're trying to say. And she told me the error, and I corrected it. I've probably never made that error again. In fact, I hear it every time someone else does it. I remember saying, hey, feel free to tell me anything like that anytime you want, because the way she approached me was so kind. She was positive, she was helpful, she was thankful. That's so much better than her going home and criticizing me to 10 different people. She's someone who rooted for me. She's someone who wanted to help me. And if someone's courageous enough to come to you and tell you about some blind spot in your life, you'd be foolish not to listen. Proverbs 9:8 says, do not reprove a scoffer, or he will hate you. Reprove a wise man, and he will love you. No one loves criticism, but if it's valid, appreciate it. And by the way, remember before you try to take that speck out of someone else's eye, that it's the most sensitive part of the body. You got to be really gentle when you do that. Don't unload your criticism to others unless you really care about that person, unless you love that person. Jesus said, before you go, examine yourself. He said, take that plank out of your eye so that you'll be able to clearly see when you remove the speck from your brother's eye. Do you really care about that person, or are you looking for some way to make him feel bad? Are you going to correct him in love, or are you going to ventilate in anger? Have you fully forgiven that person who wronged you, or are you seeking revenge? Maybe the best advice here toward the end is be flexible. Keep the big picture. The older a house, the more vulnerable it is to termites. And I think the older we get, the more susceptible we are to developing a critical spirit. I've told couples in marriage counseling before they get married, listen, the best traits of the person you're getting ready to marry probably become stronger as they age, and the worst traits probably become worse. We tend to become better at criticizing as we get older if we were a little good at it when we were younger, right? We tend to be more generous as we get older if we were a little generous when we were younger. I think as we get older, it's easy to feel neglected and we resist change. We like things done the right way. I mean, we like things done the way they used to be, right? There are a few people I admire more, and these are the people that have aged in God's kingdom who have kept a positive and gracious and supportive spirit about them, because I don't think that's always easy to do. Really, I think this whole sermon, now that I've preached for 20 or 25 minutes, could really be summed up in a single verse. Verse 12, in everything you do to others, do what you'd have them to do to you. It's about as simple as that. Judge others the way you want them to judge you.